Hello, my name is Father Jack Costello. I'm the rector of Epiphany Cathedral. Thank you so much for viewing our webpage and becoming more familiar with our parish. In this section of the webpage, I give a short reflection on the previous Sunday's Gospel, which about Jesus noticing in the temple about how the scribes and Pharisees acted when they prayed and gave money and wanted to be noticed, and then a poor widow gives all that she has to Almighty God, and he compares the two. One message that we may hear in today's gospel is that we can never judge a book by its cover. Not everyone who wears a white hat or a white coat is a good guy, and not all teachers of faith are those whom we think they are. St. Mark opens today's passage with some very harsh and cutting words of warning to those religious leaders who were guilty of play acting at their duties to care for and to teach God's people. At the time of Christ, the scribes wore a long robe with a long white mantle decorated with beautiful long fringes. These white robes identified the wearer as someone of importance and prestige. Christ comments that the scribes liked to be greeted with respect in the marketplace is a reference to the custom which dictated that common people in the marketplace should rise respectively to their feet whenever a scribe walked past. Likewise, at banquets and dinner parties, when rich men invited scribes as guests, they would always be given prominent seats. Similarly, the scribe's synagogue seat of honor placed him up front with the Torah, facing the congregation. By placing the story of the poor widow right after his strong words about the scribes and the Pharisees, St. Mark wants us to ask the question, who are the real teachers of faith here? The poor widow or the scribes and the Pharisees? In the culture of Christ's time, the Hebrew word for widow carried the meaning of one who is silent. Because in Middle Eastern societies, unless a woman has a man to speak on her behalf, she was expected to be silent. Not surprisingly, Jesus points out the small and silent act of giving of this widow as being far more generous and sincere than all the showy gifts of the well-dressed rich or the pomp and regala of the so-called religious teachers of the day. According to Jesus, the real teachers of the faith are not the self-appointed and the self-serving guardians of truth, but rather the people like this silent woman of trust, this poor widow who was willing to place herself completely in the hands of a loving God. This unnamed and wordless woman preached a far more powerful sermon by her heroic charity than any learned teacher from the temple or synagogue. Like the widow in today's first reading, we can presume that her humble act of giving would also be rewarded many times over by God's gracious design. Whatever good we do for someone in trouble or need will always come back to us as a blessing. If we try to ease someone else's burden by our kindness or concern, if we take the time to listen or reach out a helping hand, if we touch just one other life by our good example, then surely we will have made a difference. Whatever good you and I do, no matter how small or how secret, God sees it, God blesses it, and God uses it to increase the power of grace and goodness in our world. How we choose to spend our time, our efforts, or our money each day either contributes to or decreases the love of Christ all around us. On one level, the incident outside the temple also reminds us that sometimes we too might be tempted to judge others only by their appearances, by what they drive or how they dress, or maybe even what they put into Sunday's collection basket. Christ, on the other hand, measures us in a totally different way. His eyes look deep into our souls, to reveal the inner motives and hidden intentions of our hearts. He is concerned with the silent sacrifices we make for others each day in His name, and how we live our day-to-day lives and duties, willingly surrendering ourselves to God's purpose to make the Father's love more evident in the world today. As we approach Thanksgiving and Christmas, this might well be a good time to ask ourselves how much of our heart is really in the gifts we plan to give to others. Or are we just going through the motions because it is expected of us by custom? Are there perhaps others of God's children who are really more in need of our help than the usual people on our Christmas lists? In today's gospel, the poor woman gave practically nothing in the eyes of the rich and powerful, but in God's sight, she gave deeply from her heart, and in the long run, it is that kind of sincerity that really counts for Christ. May we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus then, and ask Him for this grace in each one of our hearts in the upcoming week, that we will be there to serve the Lord and others. May God bless you all. Have a great week.